Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekly webinar. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. We're just doing a sound check and getting everything situated. So just stand by and we'll be ready in about 2 minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Market Insights webinar. My name is Nadine Vodder. I probably sound a little different than the person you're used to hearing. The Sultan of Sonar is out today. He is in wine country, so Brad and I will be taking over and walking you through the webinar today. We're going to talk a little bit about indices that we already have in Sonar, but a different way to look at them and kind of give you guys some insights on how to read into them a little bit more and give you some extra features on how to insulate yourself for produce season that is coming up and all of that exciting stuff that everybody has to deal with throughout the seasonality of freight. So we'll just kick it off here. And first thing we wanted to talk about is just to remind everybody on the webinar at Transparency in Atlanta in May, we're going to be having Sonar training classes. So make sure that you're looking out for some emails on those to get one-on-one small groups of people training sessions with our market experts as well as some of the Sonar sales guys. So I'll kick it on over to you, Brad.
Perfect. Good afternoon, and again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Very sorry and sad to not have Zach here, but hopefully you guys can put up with us here today. We wanted to start with something very high level, kind of macro level data sets that we have here on the screen to give you insight into capacity in the market on kind of a longer term, more strategic level. So the data sets that we are looking at in the blue mountain is the non-seasonally adjusted truck and transportation hires or employee numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what we're trying to show here and what we're trying to have you guys understand is the amount of people who have been added to the trucking transportation industry. And what we've done, and I think you can certainly see since 2010, the increases that we've seen and into 2015 where we kind of had a peak and then somewhat of a level off in 16 before picking back up in 17. And for those of you who have been around and been in the industry, for a while, I think you can certainly relate to that 15, 16 kind of slow time in the freight markets. Certainly spilled over into the amount of people who are being hired and being added into the industry. So with that being said, we're also, what I have laid over this number is our used truck. Oh, and let me back up really quick. So the employment data set can be found in the chart under the ticker symbol EPN, which you should be able to see in the top left there. You can also search in the enter symbol, just type in employment, and you'll get a scroll down to be able to find that number or find that data set. But what we're overlaying here is the used truck, the 3-year-old used truck pricing, and I do have these on a dual y-axis chart. So what you're seeing on the right y-axis is the non-seasonally adjusted truck transportation employment numbers. What you're seeing on the left, or the second y-axis, is the price for a 3-year-old, a national average price for a 3-year-old used truck in the United States. And the interesting thing here is, and why we look at this for kind of a longer term, more strategic data set, is a lot of the purely added capacity to the freight industry or to the freight markets is typically the smaller carriers and smaller size carriers, ranging in 1 to 20. And typically when they're going out and purchasing trucks to add to their fleets, we'll see the used truck pricing for 3-year-old truck pricing shoot up, kind of a supply and demand. As the demand's higher for participants in the industry to add trucks and purchase them, the price tends to go up. So the interesting thing, I think, is you certainly see this climb in our used truck pricing, kind of the similar drop as we saw the level off of not hiring many drivers or adding many people to the trucking transportation industry. But then as we had this surge in 2017 and through 2018 from a load volume standpoint and a very volatile freight environment to participate in from volumes and pricing standpoint, we saw a lot of capacity start to be added or beginning to be added. And you can certainly see this start to happen here at the end of 2017 and into 2018 as we see, along with these transportation employment numbers, we also see these used truck prices increase, and kind of bringing us back to another data set that we have internally to show these data sets and how they compare, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are now very familiar with, is our kind of another way that we show and can list available capacity on more of a strategic, longer term viewpoint. And that's when looking at our tender volume index data set, which is what I have here in the orange, and our tender rejection percentage, which is what I have here in the blue. So again, for those who may not know, looking on the left y-axis here is our tender volume index. That was, we benchmarked the national load volumes on March 1st of 2018. So what we're showing here with a little over our year-over-year date is a small increase in the year-over-year volumes at a national level for freight. And then as you see the drastic difference in the tender rejection percentages being near 25% in the beginning of March in 2018, and at this time today, less than 7%. So year over year, roughly 75% of freight being accepted by end participants through our data, and to date now, over 93% of all national freight transactions are being accepted. And I think that's a very important and interesting data set to look at for that longer, strategic type planning when you talk about a lot of participants being involved in RFPs currently and trying to understand how competitive or how aggressive they need to make some of these bids, whether you're asset, whether you're 3PL, whether you're a shipper trying to decide who to go with. I think the combination of these couple data sets, they show they show the whole picture from a lot of different views. It shows you the amount of people being added to the industry, shows you how they're being added to the industry, and then it clearly correlates with the volumes that we're seeing here, so the actual available freight, and then the reaction of the market by using the tender rejection percentage and looking at that. And the tender rejection percentage, again, being such a great tool to understand how the market is reacting to changes. So currently, the market reacting to these changes being that a lot of freight is being accepted. There's plentiful capacity. We haven't probably quite hit that. If you look at our year-over-year data and our year-over-year numbers, we haven't quite gotten into that May, June timeframe where we've seen year-over-year a surge in our summer volumes, which will be interesting to see this year with the added capacity if we see a similar surge in our tender rejection percentage. But again, this hopefully meant to be a kind of longer-term strategic data set for our users to take advantage of. And also, as we transition here to look at some of our mapping features, please remember on the top of your meeting, your Zoom meeting, you should have a Q&A section. We'll certainly get to as many questions as we have time for in this roughly half-hour webinar. So please feel free to ask, and Nadine and I will definitely address. And kind of changing lanes quickly, we wanted to take another or a different look, I guess, or a different study and see how we can view maps and how you can utilize those to be great time series data sets in understanding what's happening. So I know Nadine wanted to kind of lead the charge on what we're looking at here. So we'll take it away, Nadine, as we jump into the next segment here.
Yeah, I think before we do that, though, let's do that HOS 11.
Sure.
Yeah, let's.
Thank you for reminding me.
So we kind of looked into the hours of service and also overlaid those with the tender volume. And since we had the tender volume already pulled up, it's interesting to see how the hours of service are being affected by the volumes increasing or decreasing over time. So just a quick overview of what the hours of service is. It's so volatile due to it's a daily number, so the up and down is the weekends and the peaks are on Wednesdays. So what you're looking at here is the hours of service with the outbound tender volume overlaid, and you can see that during the times of high volume that the hours of service are actually utilized better. They're able to use more hours of service during that time than they are during the slower months.
Yep, absolutely. And hopefully you guys can see, maybe I drew one too many average lines here, so maybe I'll remove a couple of them. But just kind of what I did is drew a couple average lines so you can see the current on the far right-hand side. You can see the current hours of service numbers, so the utilization of drivers on a daily basis on their 11-hour clock and how that associates with load volumes, which I think certainly makes sense. The more volume, the more freight available, the more drivers are going to be driving, the more availability that they have to certainly take potentially longer runs and longer haul freight to up the amount of hours they're on duty. And then in some of these slower times of the year, when we maybe draw an average line here in the beginning of January, seeing a little over 6.5 hours of utilization compared to a 6 hour and it looks like 3/4 hour or 6 hours and 3/4 utilization to some of your busier times here in June and July. You can just kind of see how tightly correlated load volume is with the utilization of trucks, and just meant to be, I think, another way via ELD data, just kind of another supporting, tying in the tender rejections, tender volumes now, employment data, and our used truck pricing, just providing another way and another surrounding data set for our users to be able to see, how load volumes affect, maybe you're a carrier, asset-based, or a small small owner, and how that could affect your bottom line and your utilization, and how important I think it is to work with and go to areas and places where you're going to best utilize your hours, which we do have this HOS 11 data available at all 135 granularity, so you can certainly view it in that manner if you have areas that you typically operate in or around. So another data set here, the HOS 11. I know it hasn't probably gotten much attention as it relates to volume in the market, but I think we found some nice correlations here.
Right. Yep. I think that's a good segue into the maps. So I'm sure everybody on the phone is familiar with produce season and knows that it's creeping its little head probably coming up in the next couple of weeks or months. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how you can maybe insulate yourself, or at least prepare and know maybe when it's going to hit. We've all been in the situation where we have taken, your contracted rates and your contracted loads out of southern Georgia and southern Florida, and thinking you're still going to be able to secure capacity and make margin, and then you can't seem to get that load covered unless you take $1,000 loss. So, and then you're already stuck with those loads. So we're going to show you a way that you can watch on the maps and see when produce season is going to hit, since our data is a 24-hour-old data, and you normally don't know, of course, until the rates start to change, and that is sometimes delayed just due to the fact that it is rating data. So we're going to show you how you can look at the tender rejections on the map, and over time watch how Florida and Texas begin to start to turn blue. So if anybody on the phone might not be familiar with the outbound tender reject index, but that is the percentage of freight that's being rejected in the country or into the specific market that you're looking at. So we're going to look at the rejections on a map, and it is a heat map. So of course, the deeper the blue, the higher the tender rejections, the wider the area, the lower the tender rejections. So if you look at Texas and Florida right now, you see them still being pretty low. We can associate tender rejections with a couple of different things, but the main thing is that people are going to reject freight when they have better options. So you're not going to take that bad load out of that market that you might not have enough money in if you have a better option. So when you're watching the tender rejections start to change over time, if you go back, Brad, to April of 2018, you'll be able to show how I'm going to kind of just do a time elapse to show you guys kind of what I'm talking about. If you look at April, you see Florida a little bit blue, a little bit white, and then you go maybe 2 weeks into it, you'll see Florida get a little bit bluer. And then if you go into May, you'll see it get a little bit bluer. And this is a good indication to show that produce season is hitting. And then, of course, everybody knows to react in whatever specific way that you want to react. If you want to try to get freight into Florida, or you want to just avoid your contracted loads and decline them, or go on the spot market and try to, of course, make more money. This will kind of help you see it before maybe another broker or another carrier does, because if they don't have SONAR, of course, then they're not going to know. So this is a really good indication of when produce season is hitting. People are going to start rejecting their contracted freight and start working more on the spot market. And that's what's going to, of course, the tender rejections are going to increase. Those states and those markets are going to turn blue, and you're going to know that produce season is rapidly approaching.
Yes, absolutely. And we can also, along with the maps, I think are extremely helpful, especially with the added date subject here, so you can view and you can change the actual date and time frame you're looking at, and that can be found under the calendar icon on your map. And also, I think another good way is creating and using some of our watch lists. And I'm actually going to jump in and create a watch list to kind of just provide kind of a quick 101 how you would do so, and how helpful it can be to look at maybe specific areas that you're operating in and out of. So when talking about being exposed potentially to areas, as we have produce coming up right around the corner, you may be interested in a few different areas that whether or not you're running produce or you have refrigerated trailers or refrigerated actual commodity as a shipper, you potentially may still be affected by this environment because we're all somewhat vying for the same capacity or a limited amount of capacity when it comes to the freight market. So how we can do this is we can actually customize the individual symbols that we want to look at. And I've named this symbol list produce, and this will actually save this list. So anytime you come back to this watch list and you want to look at this specific data set again, you certainly can by just typing in that name or searching that name. So we can do a few different ways. One, we can do by entering in the ticker symbols. So if I wanted to look at, for example, Miami, and I wanted to see the reefer tender rejection percentage specific, maybe I wanted to look at the van as well, and I wanted to break them out and look at them separately, I certainly could. And maybe also I want to look at my head haul index, which is the difference in outbound volumes in that Miami market and your inbound delivering volumes. And I'm also going to put, being that Atlanta is typically heavily related to what's going on in the Southeast, I think I also want to keep an eye on Atlanta and see what's going on there with some of the same data sets. And as I create this custom view, I think it's also helpful to note that you can actually add, if you have exposure on the same or maybe a variety of different lanes on a regular basis. So just as an example, maybe I want to add in from Atlanta, we'll say Atlanta to Dallas, and I want to look at that lane to see what's happening, see if there's any activity on a daily basis, see if anything I need to keep an eye on or be made aware of. So I've now created my custom list. I've named it produce. From there, my display type, I'm actually going to start with a standard watch list. As we go through, I may create another one with a little bit different view, but just a quick overview for you to understand and look at maybe a variety of different data sets that are meaningful to your business. So we now have these data sets, but in a watch list, they may not mean too much to you to just see the value and to look at a -1, for example, for Atlanta. So we have a couple helpful ways that you can view the data, and one of my favorite is to look at the 52-week low and high, so you can get a quick reference point of the data that you're looking at. So for example, looking at the head haul index, a 0 value for Atlanta would essentially be the equilibrium point of that market based on the automated transactions, load transactions that we're tracking. So as you can see all the way to the right, a -77 index value so is the lowest that market's been on a year-over-year basis, and 80 is the highest positive value that it's been. So at essentially a -1, it's at equilibrium. Doesn't seem to be, too volatile in terms of something that you need to be aware of, or that, produce season or any significant volumes are coming out of there as it compares to freight delivering into it. But I think that gives you good context of what you're looking at. And then similarly, a market in Miami that typically tends to act like a backhaul market, if you will, using our terms with the head haul index, and seeing that it typically is year over year a negative value, being as low as 125 negative points there on our head haul index, as high as -55 there on our 52-week high. So the degree in which it's a backhaul, which is still very valuable information to understand as capacity is used to maybe not having freight out of there. So when we do see these volatile increases of produce season, of flowers, things like that, even if it is still a negative value in that market, it is still something to take note of and to keep an eye on, because the volatility is really the most important thing, right? And then kind of moving along in our watch list and looking at Atlanta to Dallas, seeing what that current, we're looking at tender rejection percentage there of 5 is, seems to be almost at a 52-week low, as we see here on the right-hand side, and then kind of going down the line now, looking at our rejection percentage data. And as you can see, looking at their 52-week lows, they're all pretty much, Miami's had a little uptick for reefer tender rejection percentage, being at 7% currently and being as low as 2%, but as you see, it's 52-week high being upwards of 47%. So maybe not something to readily react to, or, produce may not completely be in effect there. But of course, each one of these data sets, if this doesn't provide you the insight that you need at a quick glance, if you're not as familiar with the data sets and you're just getting in here to play around with them, you can certainly chart any one of these data sets by clicking on the bar chart icon, and you can see the direction that the market is starting to trend. So looking at, for example, the reefer tender reject of Miami, you can certainly see it's had some extremely volatile times back in back in May and June of 18, excuse me, and a little bit in November and December, it looks like, but currently it's directionally moving upwards. So maybe something you want to keep an eye on, especially with April and May right around the corner, but it seems to be somewhat subdued. But this just being a nice way to, I think, get a high-level overview. Again, all of these are customizable. So if I do X out of my produce watch list and I want to go back in there, and I want to look at a different list, maybe I want to utilize one of our newer watch list options, which we have the gauge chart, which I chose from our right-hand side. And we can go into our symbol search, I want to go to my load from existing symbol list. And since I created the produce data set, I want to go all the way down to my most recent. You can find produce there. I want to use that symbol list. There it is. Found it. And now I have kind of a similar view that I created with the 52-week high and low on the standard watch list, but just a different way of viewing it through the gauge chart. And I actually really like this one. I think I've had Zach maybe bring it up once or twice. It's one of my favorite ways to view the data along with the map. I think it just gives you great reference point with the 52-week high and low on the gauge, and then being able to see what the current value is at as we again scroll through the custom watch list page that we made. And similarly with all of our watch lists, if you click on the data set, it will export you to an actual chart. So some nice functionality there. I don't know that we definitely covered that on some previous webinars, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can further customize your dashboard or some of the availability that you have within the platform to make things most relevant to what you're doing and how your business operations work. With that, I think we're coming close up on time. We'll maybe open up for questions here in the last 3 or 4 minutes. If we have any, please again use the Q&A on the top of your screen. And if some of you drop off the call here, if you are new, you can find us at www.freightwaves.com/sonar if you would like any further information or to speak with anyone direct on our team. For those of you that are regular, you of course probably have a contact, and please let us know if you have any direct questions. We'll be around for another several minutes, so please give us a shout if you want us to answer anything on the air. All right, doesn't seem we have any questions for this week. Again, for those of you that are Sonar users, please reach out to us if you have any questions or need any assistance. For those that are new and you want more information, again, freightwaves.com/sonar. You can get in contact with us there. Please don't forget, for those of you already attending Transparency 19, May 6th through 8th in Atlanta, to sign up for Sonar training. For those of you that would like more information, again, probably find us on our website, freightwaves.com/sonar. Thanks again for joining us. Promise you we won't bore you too much next week. We'll have Zach back in town. So we look forward to seeing you guys again next week at 2 p.m. Eastern.